The gleaming, colorful fallen leaves were gently sizzling beneath the feet. Natalia wandered through the empty park in a melancholy mood. Going back home was a little scary. She deceived herself by claiming to be on duty at the hospital and taking a day off at this very hospital, which was her first time in their brief life together with Andre. It didn't suit her in the slightest, but there was no other option to address her uncertainties. How long can you feign faith in your husband's explanations when you have no trust in his heart? The discovery of a strange fragrance from his sweater, the strange red hair on his shirt, and the presence of someone else's lipstick rolled up under the bathtub are not considered coincidences. It's true that hair can stick to crowded transport, and her friend Zoe had the chance to come over. Too many coincidences led to Natalia's decision to step away and tell her husband that she was on duty, which resulted in her returning home. The walk had come to a close, and it was time to head back home. What awaits her arrival? Does the misjudgment of Andrew's identity lead to remorse or bitterness in their marriage? It was a massive disappointment, and my legs wouldn't be able to carry me home. Natalia, who was feeling cowardly, cursed herself by climbing the stairs and opening the door with her keys. The first thing she heard was Zoe's booming laugh. Natalia reprimanded herself by saying, "I was filled with dread upon Zoya's arrival." I realized that the laughter was coming from the bedroom. Without thinking, Natalia pushed the door open and stood on the threshold, contemplating her husband who she loved dearly, holding his best friend in his arms. "I'm not interested in it." I'm not interested in seeing anyone else. Evade everything and stay away from this deception, the suffering, and the double betrayal. The woman who had been tricked throughout the city remained completely exhausted for hours, leading her to lay on a park bench and stare blankly until dawn. All the next morning, she had to make all the necessary decisions. Without delay, she'll depart. Her stomach was filled with remorse when she realized she could spend the night in the apartment where she had been so shamelessly cheated. She has a shift today in which she must write her resignation letter to HR, and since they will not fire her, she is unconcerned. You can also spend the night in a hospital. After Andre's departure for work, you can return in the morning to retrieve your belongings. The husband has the right to the half of the apartment, which they purchased together, but now there is no motivation to participate in the exchange. It's possible that she might see it at a later time. Baba Nura has given us a house in the village so we can stay here temporarily. It's possible that a job opportunity will arise, given the constant scarcity of medicines in rural areas. The hospital was taken ill due to this speedy procedure, but they eventually resolved the matter and Natalia was paid on the same day. She slept well on her sister's couch and then packed up at home before heading to the train station. The good news is that he wasn't smart enough to show up at the hospital for a fight. He is now unable to locate her, so she blocked her number immediately. The old country house was greeted by its new owner with closed shutters and a messy courtyard. She rushed across the grass, opened the shutters, and dust blasted through the windows. Inside, there was also some dust, quietness, but a pleasant feeling. The windows let in dust motes that danced on the floor. Baba Nura's dried herbs hung in the corner, and a bed covered in tulle caps was adorned with pillows. A respite from the bustling city life, a time of inner peace and quiet. Having consumed her sandwich quickly, Natalia removed a bucket and rag to give the house sand. By night, the property appeared to be more residential than before, and when she returned from work seeking luxury weed, Natalie decided to put off the battle against them until tomorrow. She sat on the porch with a cup of tea as the sun was setting beneath the clouds. There was no noise and nothing unusual. It was hard to believe that she had lived in a city filled with people and traffic just yesterday. The night was getting darker as moths started to dance into the light. Bats appeared in the darkening sky. Natalia began to feel drowsy all the time while she went back to her house. Early birds would chirp and occasionally make loud sounds over the nearby roosters. Natalia, having had a quick breakfast, chose to start the landscaping process and ventured into the yard with hammers. Like an old army, the weeds were growing in large masses, and with a quick sigh, she cut off the first burdock by the root. In approximately 15 minutes, a lady appeared with her head out of the hedge behind neighbor's hedge, wrapped in tulips, and finally asked, "Who is this you are going to be, honey? Stay with us for an extended period? Good day, everyone. Baba Nura's granddaughter is me. My reason for being here was to live. Natka, What's the story behind your disappearance? I am unsure of your identity. The present location is solely responsible for the city of Kralja. Did your home go sour, or did your life in the big city go wrong? Both, she said softly. In case you're wondering, shall we stay here? The Green Army was engaged in a battle until lunchtime, when they were defeated and clustered in an impressive pile by the fence. The broken window pane was now a concern for me. Is it possible that Uncle Petya still lives within a few yards and occasionally aids Baba Nyura with household chores? Although he was present, his elder years had transpired and lurched to death. He acknowledged that Natalia was his neighbor's granddaughter, chuckled and scratched his head, and eventually concurred, "As a neighbor, I can assist you. Only the glass can take care of itself, your grandmother, but these are trying times." "I'll pay for it," Natalia said with relief to the old man, and quickly returned home to prepare the place for repairs. After that, Uncle Petya appeared and placed a glass under his arm, gently leaning it against the wall and starting to take measurements. The old man called out, "Get to work!" And then he noticed the new glass, which had been carefully placed. "Thank you very much," Natalia exclaimed. When she was asked about her debt, she thought that the cost might have been too steep for its size. Nevertheless, since she had promised to keep it, there were no places to put it. She paid the bill without any resistance and pondered on how to proceed. Her next step is to look for employment, as her life will likely be challenging. Despite her age, Natalia has become an unfamiliar presence in the village, and it seems that she will not be received with open arms. Therefore, after hanging the ironed curtain on the newly glazed window, the woman went straight to meet Chairman Vasily Ilyich. Unlike the other villagers, Vasily Ilyich quickly recognized her, listened attentively, and smiled broadly. "We've recently had a paramedic marry an ensign, but she's gone beyond her comfort zone for him. Where did you come across your significant other? Even though you have a foreign partner online and can write him out for free, it's still fun." For the third month running, the village has been facing difficulties due to a series of nonsensical activities, including being unable to reach the district center with its long road and hospital filled with patients. Your grandmother was the final herbalist in the village. "Are you taught that by someone else?" Natalia's response was negative, indicating her inclination towards the official position. "I'm not sure if it wasn't for my grandmother, I could have pursued medicine. It was enjoyable to observe her treating people and witness their recovery, which I sincerely appreciate. The reason behind my decision to treat people was obvious." "Get treated," Vasily Ilyich explained. "All that is required is to go to the first aid station, register, and begin treatment tomorrow." "Appears to be where I should go now." Natalia's expression conveyed her thankfulness. "Thank you, Vasily Ilyich. I didn't think it would take too long to solve this problem." "You've made a judgment call and reached the correct place," Vasily Ilyich warned with an index finger. Later in the morning, Natalia completed all formalities by unlocking the first aid station doors and inspecting her belongings, discarding expired drugs, and making opportunely listing what she needed to purchase. The village was immediately informed of the new paramedic's arrival, and within an hour and a half, the first patient arrived at the door. An elderly gentleman with slender build, gray hair, leaning on a damaged staff, had quick and unusually young eyes. "What's the doctor up to?" "What is it?" he inquired from the entranceway. "Where's the white coat? It's only her first day." Natalia nodded at me and said, "I'm going to put on a dressing gown today and I'll get it on tomorrow." At the very next moment, she looked at the hanging medical gown. "Duck should have been there right then," frowned grandfather. "You have no sterility, but that's just germ." The old man smiled at her and said, "What the heck is wrong with your lower back?" He turned his head in an agony. "The rain has left me with sore hands and feet, and I need a third leg," he said, shaking his stick in the air. "You've already learned to dox it, let's go for it." After acknowledging that her grandfather didn't require treatment, Natalia continued to inquire about all the symptoms and respond to long-winded discussions about diseases with stories from his life. A vast array of recollections. Upon finishing the reception, she was informed of Semyon Lukich's name, his arthritis and shortness of breath, dislike for Uncle Petya, and great admiration for Vasily Ilyich. She also learned about the chocolate treats that Kuzminichna bakes, how Tanka fiercely raises the price of moonshine from the next street, as well as the fact that Arkhip Ivanovich died of an illness in the village due to a shortage of medicines. The reception was encapsulated by Natalia's response. I may not have managed with the filly, but she conveyed that she would provide an ointment made by bees to alleviate lower back and joint pain. After distributing a snow-white tube to the contented old man, she headed back home. Natalia was hungry and went to the refrigerator to reheat the pilaf she had prepared the previous day. She had a fondness for it and was proficient at cooking it, using cinnamon in the Iranian style. Despite its spicy and rich flavor, it was not sharp. Natalia's expectation of a substantial meal was met with disappointment as the roaster offered only one slice of pilaf to scrape together. Is it possible that I exerted too much pressure yesterday? She inquired, mumbling, Maybe I didn't consume it while unconscious. I also anticipated it would endure for a few days. The girl had no clue what was going on with the strange occurrence, and she decided to forget about it and proceed to make borscht for dinner. With a sharp object in her hand, she murmured, Do you think I'll finish borscht for half-shilling tomorrow? Can I expect to be left empty-handed by a disheveled eater? But there was still so much to do, I had to get a new white coat and have this new blouse for tomorrow. There was an increase in patient numbers on the second day. Guests at the reception included a middle-aged calf girl who complained of pain in her ears, accompanied by swollen eyes, an unidentified young mother with rashes that appeared out of nowhere, hypertension from an old woman, and teen man who cut his hand with broken glass. Ultimately, Semyon Lukich made an appearance, and he felt it was crucial to express gratitude to Doktor for the miraculous oil, which had helped him achieve some degree of equilibrium. Natalia was pleased to see the lack of trust and aloofness of those who arrived. The fact that the young mother was happy that her child was sweating, news that blood pressure had decreased in the elderly woman after the injection, and Semyon Lukich's mustache was curled up with a happy expression. Upon her return, she was both tired and cheerful. The refrigerator caught her attention immediately, and she was awestruck. The borscht pot was still present. The amount of delicious main dish was not clearly determined. It appears to be reduced, and maybe not, with the exception of half a serving. I thought pilaf is better than borscht. She smiled and put the pot on the fire. The leapfrog with fewer ingredients persisted for several days. Natalia, who was no longer strong enough to stand up, discreetly sported her hair onto the refrigerator door and whispered, I just want to be a spy, but only in person. The door was left without any hair in the evening, and there were a few cutlets on the tray. Did someone really conduct a search of Natalia's house during her absence? The items are still present, and they don't seem like they were taken by robbers. She spent an entire evening repressing her thoughts, but the next day she shared her observations with Semyon Lukich, who had become a pioneer and an honorary medical center patient, and visited the hospital almost daily. Lukich regained his composure and raised his index finger to the sky upon hearing the news, acknowledging that Nyurka, their grandmother, had a gift for healing. Semyon Lukich, I think this house still has some power. Natalia was on the brink of making a plea. The only skills Baba Niura had was to gather herbs and prepare them. The pharmacy has a section that sells herbs as well. Grandpa shook his head and said, I don't know. He pointed his crooked cane at the window and said, Avon, you should close your office and leave for home. The storm is approaching. A heavy thunderstorm was imminent, with dark clouds swirling and rising high above the ground. Lukich ordered a return to his yard after blocking the sun's circle and kicking up chilly, gusty winds. Natalia ran after him while already running around, breaking in the wind with her face battered by it. The first drops fell to the ground outside the yard, followed by an avalanche of water, and then the girl flew under the roof canopy, already wet. The weather was causing chaos as the courtyard transformed into a small lake. The street was inundated with rain and trees were damaged by strong winds. Natalia was a little frightened for the roof's safety, but she quickly changed into tiddler and boiled tea. The storm persisted for an hour and a half before pouring down with rain, and by 10 o'clock in the evening, everything seemed to be quiet, leaving nature to itself. Peace was not present in the old house. Despite her sensitive ear, Natalia still heard strange noises in the attic during the rain, and someone's slow and heavy footsteps were audible. Feeling scared, she decided to look out on the street and for something to call the neighbors. The yard was devoid of vegetation and rain, and the neighbors' windows were dark as if they had waited outside to escape the storm. An old ladder that was stuck in the attic was spotted by Natalia. The creature used to be tucked away in the grass behind the house, but now it was discovered against the attic window and had developed small particles of fresh mud on the steps. She entered the house, closed all the locks and bolts present, and huddled under the covers in terror, as if that was an additional safeguard. Upon momentary contemplation, she grabbed a powerful hammer and placed it under her pillow for protection. Natalia fell into a heavy, weak sleep after making the decision to go to the other end of the village to see the district police officer in the morning. However, the morning changed as well. By 7 o'clock, when her night's sleep had already passed and she was about to wake up, someone knocked at the door with caution. While holding the hammer, Natalia toppled the latch and looked at her guest. "Dear Sveta, he is like Andre, just thin and without hair or any kind of clothes." Feeling faint, she contemplated a disturbing thought. "Andre and I believe he still found her in this wilderness." Although the stranger spoke, his voice was low and quiet, resembling her former husband. "I'm sorry to say that, but I have to trust you for your patience. Being a partisan and hiding your true self is completely unacceptable. Are you capable of granting me access to your home? Let me clarify." Natalia was displeased with the polished tone and politeness, so she let the man enter the house without any hesitation. The stranger entered the kitchen with confidence, sitting on a stool and exclaiming, "I didn't know that this house belonged to you." I perceived it as a typical abandoned house, similar to those found in remote villages. I was left without a roof and took up residence in your house. My stay here was brief until you arrived. I departed and constructed a cabin in the vicinity, but I was already familiar with this area. The storm that occurred yesterday caused my house to collapse in one go, and I had to flee into your attic. Excuse me, I survived the storm, but you must have been scared out of your being. Do you also make pilaf and borscht? Natalia inquired, feeling empowered. The man expressed his confusion by saying, "I am unable to comprehend how it occurred. I haven't had the pleasure of eating home-cooked food in a while, but your pilaf made my lips water with aroma." He pointed to an old china cabinet, and when the girl opened the door, she found a small purse with crisp bills inside. "You're a pioneer," she quipped, as if to say, "and you have it in your blood." A sad and happy stranger smiled. "I was a tramp in the past, so I don't know why you were here." I am still conscious of my human nature. Natalia was hesitant. Offensively hurting a normal person is not an easy task. She uses her wit to convey that the bag and imprisonment do not hold any promise. I'm sorry," she said apologetically, and the man waved his hand. Their businesses were not significant, but they maintained their feet. My love for my wife is overshadowed by my lack of character, which makes me doubt their loyalty to me. I foolishly assumed that I was the boss, my wife the chief bookkeeper, and the wall would be unyielding, but the enemy wouldn't get in. The primary support just slowed down here. My faithful deputy and my friend developed romantic feelings for each other, leading to their clandestine withdrawal of funds from the company under my signature, a board of directors scandal, and me being placed under an article. At that point, I couldn't endure such a betrayal, so I sacrificed everything and went on the run. I've been living in the villages alone for 4 years. Natalia's heart was broken as she revealed, "My husband betrayed me too, and while it wasn't her fault, it still caused me pain. There is no longer an option for a husband, best friend, or apartment. I'm also on the lookout for opportunities." "Mikhail," he said with a smile, "I recognize you." "You are Natalia. It's great to see you, Mikhail." Suddenly, Natalia was excited. "As it turned out, I wanted you to have just one room in the house since I took away your belongings. My plan is to act foolishly and behave appropriately, as I have no definite plans. It's only necessary that we lend a hand to each other. I'll cook you some pilaf, and you can take care of the gate." "Okay, good turn of events." Mikhail smiled further and said, "I will be nice and earn my bread." Shortly after, Semyon Lukich entered the infirmary. "What am I doing wrong?" he asked Natalia. "The public is starting to show respect to you." "Don't bark, Semyon Lukic. He stayed in my house all night while I was away, so why should I throw him on the street?" His character is not characterized by blockbuster ambition, but his family and work environment were severely disappointed, leaving him with nothing to live for. Baba Nyura used to say, "Give it to anyone who asks you," and this person is even embarrassed to do so. It was him who ingested my sweets and stored the money in the locker to prevent any theft. You're probably correct, Lukic, as he spread his hands. People say kicking a stray dog out of the yard is scum. It's a matter of being conscientious and at least deficient in food. Semyon Lukic, the Minister of Agriculture, jollily pointed at the peasants who were taking a break near an old oak tree for smoke and apologized for their offense as they heard many bad feminine dialects. Mikhail demonstrated his good tenant status by not being idle, fixing something, catching fish on the ear, and bringing mushrooms from the forest. At times, he assists the neighbors and earns additional income. He was courteous and unapproachable with Natalia, but she always observed his thoughtful and slightly melancholic expression on her. Mikhail's coolness, trite tone, and slightly manly demeanor were also appealing to her. She was afraid of her ex-husband's striking resemblance, which caused her to feel scared. The pain of betrayal persisted, and she could not put it down. Natalia discovered Mikhail with a newspaper in his hands, deep in thought, the day after he returned from work. The man briefly clarified that his wife had died in a car accident when asked about the problem. A small child was left behind by her second husband. "It's imperative that I go to the city right away." Natalia retrieved the newspaper and inquired, "What's up there?" After a week, she has been laid to rest. The funeral is not the main focus. Not just out of desperation, I didn't want to start a case. She could sit up for a prolonged duration. They were dirty and you could demonstrate everything. I had no intention of doing it. I felt content with her once. At that time, I had no cause or motive to fight for. Natalia jumped when I asked if she had one. Mikhail nodded and put his arm around her agitated shoulders after hearing her expression. Natalia persuaded her sister to accompany them to the city, where they observed a gray-haired old man loosening the soil beneath freshly weeded-in rose bushes at Mikhail's previous home. Mikhail greeted with a soft voice, and Natalia, who was closely watching her companion, observed that he appeared to be very concerned. The old man looked up, fixed his gaze, then approached the guests. "Misha, where did you come from?" Suddenly evasive. "Very quickly," eluded Mikhail. It was revealed to me that the Ira had perished. The old man frowned when he replied, "Yes, they buried me last week." The non-human entity left Antoshka as an orphan. You're wondering if it's possible to restore the rights in secrecy or with covert action. Mikhail confidently stated that the goal is to heal, but wonders if inhumans are still alive. Is he engaging in inappropriate behavior towards his son? Who is the rightful recipient of God's kindness? Makarich questioned, appearing embarrassed. Furthermore, God punished Irina the deceased during her lifetime by insulting and raising his hand. The child's calmness was lifted by having her around. The individual was only aware of their behavior of shouting and using curse words towards the child in the early stages, but they have since started submitting documents to the children's home. Misha warned that if she decides to take their son's home, she might just end up killing him unintentionally and losing his willpower. "I must first clear myself of the charges," Mikhail declared while strolling. "What are we going to do there?" Mikhail opened the door and entered, which left Natalia stunned. Upon hearing the case, the desk clerk directed them to an office where there was a slanted number 5 on the door that had just been painted. Mikhail opened the door and with a smile on his face, gently raised his hand to the captain who leapt off the table. "Since graduation, we haven't had any interaction with each other. What is the Count of Winters?" "Mishka, I don't recognize you at all. What are you up to?" "What transpired?" "It was a reality," Mikhail declared. I initiated a detailed narrative. Leonid's classmate finished his mishaps and shook his head, telling him to sell the script for the movie theater. "Your problem is my concern, and I will handle it myself. The scoundrel is already present in our case. Despite everything, he's still present to observe. I am hopeful that you can assist me in bringing him to justice. If you're not married, it can be problematic to have a baby." He squinted his eyes and observed that Natalia was looking around the office with impatience, suggesting that she might be unattached. "I'm not certain," he said truthfully. Michael's words were more nude. Alongside Natalia, who was agitated but afraid to pose questions, Mikhail left the district department and found a concentrated silence on the closest bench. Natalia waited with eagerness. At last, he looked his significant other in the eye and asked, "Do you want to marry me?" With her breath trapped in her throat, Natalia finally answered the question that had been bothering her for a while. "If you ever say something, it will always be concerning me." Mikhail was suddenly even more serious. "Is it possible that you have a twin?" "The truth is," Natalia lowered her eyes, "the truth lies in my ex-husband's identical appearance." Mikhail expressed his dissatisfaction by saying, "Occasionally it makes me feel down." During the journey, Andre and I crossed paths. The best memories aren't in my possession. This creates a double edge in terms of complexity. What is the reason behind it? With apprehension, Natalia inquired, "Why did Andre even bring up the topic of his sibling?" "We were sent to different families in the orphanage where we were rescued by our parents on the plane. We didn't grow up together, but a very strong family showed interest in me. They were not willing to take two. I was considered more serious by them. Andre stayed there for the duration of the stay. At that point, he was deeply offended by me. Was he brought up in an orphanage? He was adopted too, no. Has already entered the teenage years. The family's situation was ordinary and they lost their son." Natalia responded with a simple, "You can't make it up by yourself" reply, shaking her head in agreement. "How did you end up cohabiting with me for such a prolonged duration?" "I was accustomed to my routine," she stated with determination. Natalia, however, added that women's emotions are determined by their gut instincts, not our eyesight. "So maybe I have a chance?" The heart felt warm by Mikhail's eyes. "Antoshka is also," Natalia muttered, leaning into the tight embrace of her future husband. The following few months were spent doing chores around the house. Mikhail had resolved his legal issues, which meant he was often absent from a classmate for weeks, and Natalia had filed for divorce from Andre. The shared apartment situation prompted her to file a lawsuit, and the separated brothers attended court. Despite everything, the meeting was still quite cool. Andre's old resentment was compounded by the growing jealousy, and the meeting did not turn out as planned. "What, lucky guy, did you take my wife away from me?" Andre gave a disapproving look to his brother. "It seems like you've lost it before," Mikhail remarked, calmly, aware that the long-standing separation between them was becoming more undone. "I'll take care of it for you without any input from the other party." Due to the extended period of not living together, Andre's efforts to reconcile with Natalia were unsuccessful, resulting in her divorce and the right to half the apartment. Andre was left feeling embarrassed after the trial, wondering how he would share his thoughts. "Sell yourself a room and you'll own one." Andre couldn't remember avoiding the frustration, and his ex-wife responded by saying that they could either improve their home or deal with Zoya. "You caused me significant distress. Take the blame." Mikhail was dragged aside by Natalia as she put an end to the unpleasant conversation and promised a return that was still below the amount invested. The courtroom's unpleasant impression was replaced by the bright sun and street noise, prompting Mikhail to joke about moving from one office to another. Natalia doubted that she and her husband would have time to make a move. She responded by saying, "We will run," as though the couple were running at each other like children, eagerly anticipating their first day together. 3 weeks later, she was tugging on Mikhail's silk tie while biting her tongue. The groom was apprehensive, saying, "We may have to wait for the painting." "I'm on the verge of success," his fiancée declared. "You must possess an irresistible charm." Mikhail smiled and chuckled, knowing that he couldn't manage to defeat his fiancée while admiring her flawless ivory dress. "You're welcome to embellish any attire." After tying her tie and tidying up her loose hair, Natalia asked in front of the mirror, "I made a commitment." As a witness, they even offered to give me an unusual present. Say goodbye to the bachelor lifestyle. The bride was looked up at by Mikhail, who then laughed and held her in his arms. At a reception held in high society, Leonid was treated with the same level of seriousness. Despite the painting, he was still mystified and silent when seated at one of the cozy restaurant tables, only giving the first toast. "Bitch, let me remind you that Lyanka has a liking for peeling. Is there any news to share?" "I won't give you my most valuable gift," he said forcefully. Leonid then cleared his throat with his hand and put on his napkin. "Let me inform you with an official face," she said, "that Oleg Mitrofanov was charged during the investigation based upon indisputable evidence of fraud, theft on a particularly large scale, and attempted murder of his common-law wife. Next week, court proceedings are scheduled to take place. For a period of 7 days. After being acquitted of all charges, you have now been restored to your property rights and are free from criminal liability." Lyanka, the detective who solved the murder case, exclaimed, "What's going on?" Leonid was about to confess after being caught in a different scam, but did she not crash herself? He chose not to do it. "I can't think of anything smarter than a punctured brake fluid hose. If he fails to respect the child's rights, I will negotiate to reduce the punishment. Is it possible for you to take a break?" Mikhail pondered. "No, not at all. And the child's prolonged sitting will not improve his condition, as it is likely that they will remove him from the orphanage." One day she stumbled and toppled over like a lump. Leonid's words, which were used by my foster father to suggest that it was better to lose with a bright person than to find success with someone else, made me feel bitter. With a grumbling voice, he glanced at the restaurant and exclaimed, "It's bittersweet." Mikhail and Natalia were able to suppress this cry by giving a lengthy kiss. Despite the temptation to try and resist, 3-year-old Antoshka decided to consume a hotter cutlet instead of hot chocolate. Grated cookies are coated with a coating of splendor. The tank was gone from my mouth in a matter of seconds. As the kid chomped with such force at her mouth, Natalia laughed and asked if she could design a wheelchair. "What is the purpose of a carriage?" Mikhail inquired, bewildered. Despite the fact that she would not be interested in the tanks, Natalia managed to narrow down her eyes and oiknula while being lifted by her husband's powerful hands.